Greetings everyone, my name is Dr. Jason Freeman. I'd like to welcome you all to my channel. So last week I did a video laying out 5 fundamental elements of what it means to be an American liberal in 2025. I also recommended 5 books that basically describe all those elements in detail. And I felt it would only be fair to lay out 5 fundamental elements of what it means to be an American conservative in 2025. I recommend 5 books that describe each of those elements in detail. Especially since a third of Americans self-identify as conservative, which outpaces the percent of Americans who self-identify as liberal. So the first fundamental element of being an American conservative in 2025 is a belief in American exceptionalism. According to Britannica, American exceptionalism is the idea that the United States of America is a unique and even morally superior country for historical, ideological, or religious reasons. It's the belief that America is the best country in the world, that is fundamentally a force for good in the world, and is a shining city on the hill as was described by Ronald Reagan. This idea is embedded in the idea of manifest destiny, which is the idea that the United States was destined by God to spread democracy across North America and around the world. One of the earliest examples of this ideology being articulated in writing is the book/pamphlet Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine was a Brit who immigrated to Philadelphia in 1774 after he was encouraged to do so by Benjamin Franklin. Thomas Paine witnessed the beginnings of the American Revolution and argued that the American colonies should become an independent nation long before most of his fellow colonists had even contemplated this idea. So a couple things about common sense. First, it is highly critical of the idea of a monarchy, especially one with hereditary succession. He argues that there's no natural distinction between kings and subjects in the way that there is between males and females, according to his view. Also, he argues that there's no real reason to exalt any man above others. In fact, he says this is an unnatural situation. He also argues that if the American colonies stayed part of Britain, they'd be perpetually drawn into wars, even wars that were not in the best interest of the colonies. This is the same argument used by modern conservatives who argue that the United States should not be in wars that are not strictly in the best interest or the national interest of the United States. He also argues that the American colonies are in a prime position to have the strongest economy, the strongest navy, and therefore the strongest military in the world. Fast forward to 2025, and conservatives still say that our military, our economy, and our democracy makes us exceptional. A second fundamental element of being an American conservative in 2025 is the belief that systemic racism is a thing of the past. As mentioned in the previous video, systemic racism is a form of racism that is pervasively and deeply embedded in and throughout systems, laws, written or unwritten policies, entrenched practices, and established beliefs and attitudes that produce, condone, and perpetuate widespread unfair treatment of people of color. While many American conservatives will concede that racist systems like Jim Crow segregation and American slavery did exist in the past, they don't believe that racism is a major problem that still plagues us today. This view is clearly articulated by conservatives in the book Divided by Faith. In the book, the authors Michael O. Emerson and Christian Smith ask white evangelicals their views on a variety of topics, including the nature and cause of continual racial disparities in the United States. And while I don't agree with most of the views articulated by white evangelicals in the book, I do think this book is valuable because it actually does give their views rather than a caricature like you might get from a popular television show or movie. A third fundamental element of being an American conservative in 2025 is the belief that individual initiative, rather than a reliance on government programs, is the way to solve America's problems. As I mentioned in my last video, American conservatives have a very suspicious view of what they call big government. Draining the swamp is part of the current parlance of most American conservatives, which basically means gutting the federal government and using the private sector to cover necessary services, which they would argue is more efficient. The idea that individual initiative rather than government programs as a way of solving America's problems is not a new idea, and is a core argument in the book Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington. Up From Slavery is basically the autobiography of Washington, who was a prominent black conservative who lived at the turn of the 20th century. He was an educator who founded the Tuskegee Institute, which later became modern-day Tuskegee University. He also became the first black American to dine with a sitting president when he dined with President Theodore Roosevelt in 1901. Washington was an outspoken critic of advancing the position of African Americans in U.S. society through legislation. Rather, he argued that African Americans should go slow and earn their place in U.S. society through work. Strong proponent for vocational education, and articulated his views in his famous speech at the 1895 Atlanta Exposition. In his speech, he argued that African Americans should cast their lot as the workforce of the American South instead of migrating to the North, and that white Southerners should employ African Americans rather than immigrant labor. The overarching idea that Washington shares with many modern conservatives is that if most Americans just work hard and follow the rules, America would just be a much better place. I hope you're enjoying the video, but before we go any further, I just want to quickly shout out my Patreon page, Dr. Jason Freeman Reacts. On the page, I have full, unedited reactions from movies such as the classic 1995 film, Dead Presidents, and the 2020 film, A Quiet Place Part 2. I also have reactions for entire seasons of shows, including Season 2 of House of the Dragon, and the first season of Doctor Who on Disney Plus, starring Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson. And for those of you who purchase my highest tier, you'll be receiving a few tokens of my appreciation, including a mug, a tote bag, and some clothing with a Diaspora Dispatch logo designed by yours truly. To get access to all of this, just go to my Patreon page and sign up for one of the tiers. You can find a link for it in the description of this video, or just type patreon.com/DRJASONFREEMAN. Thank you for listening. Now back to the video. The fourth fundamental element of being an American conservative in 2025 is the belief that life starts at conception. In my last video, I went into detail describing how views on abortion in the 19th century were very different than views of abortion in the 20th and 21st centuries. I won't go into too much detail here, but basically before 1860, abortion prior to what's known as the quickening, which are the first perceivable fetal movements, was legal. And abortion after that point became legal in 1973 with the Roe v. Wade decision, but that all changed in 2022 with the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization decision by the Supreme Court, which basically said that abortion should be decided on the state level. While some states have passed amendments to their constitutions that protect abortions in those states, other states have largely banned abortions or put heavy restrictions on them, with the exceptions of incest, rape, or in a case where a mother's life is threatened by the pregnancy going to term. To understand the pro-life viewpoint among modern conservatives, I would recommend Persuasive Pro-Life, How to Talk About Our Culture's Toughest Issue by Trent Horn. In the book, Horn argues for taking a gracious approach to talking about abortion with those who are pro-choice rather than an adversarial tone. This gracious approach includes listening to the other side, making a human connection, and finding common ground. The book even reveals disagreements about the pro-life position within the pro-life movement. For example, is it okay to have abortions when the life of the mother is at risk? And while I support abortion rights for personal and philosophical reasons, I find the book articulates reasons to oppose abortion that can't be simply boiled down to misogyny or dogmatism. The fifth fundamental element of being an American conservative in 2025 is the belief that America is built on Judeo-Christian principles. One of the primary sticking points between American liberals and American conservatives in 2025 is the conflict over the separation of church and state. This can be seen in arguments over whether or not young earth creationism can be taught in schools, or if the Ten Commandments should be displayed in government buildings, or if Christian bakers can be compelled to make cakes for same-sex couples. And while the First Amendment of the Constitution clearly states that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, there are those who still believe that Christian principles should guide how America is governed. This view can be clearly seen in the book America, Evangelicalism, Embattled and Thriving. In the book, the author, Christian Smith, you should be familiar with him more at this point, I've mentioned him multiple times. He basically talks to different evangelicals and gets their views on a variety of topics, including how the U.S. is governed. He found that large majorities of evangelicals argue that political reforms were a key aspect of being an evangelical, being a Christian in America, and that it should be thriving to change American society based on biblical principles. This can be seen in the high political engagement of American evangelicals, the high voter turnout, as well as strong support for policies seen to be in line with evangelical principles, such as bans on abortion. And so if you're truly curious as to why American conservatives vote in the way that they do and engage in politics in the way that they do, please check out this book, because it presents the views of American conservatives in their own voice with their own words and not being caricatured in movies and TV shows that might be more left-leaning. Now, if you found this video interesting and or informative, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also, please share this video. And if there are other political ideologies you want me to talk about on my channel, please leave those suggestions in the comment section below. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful rest of your day.